Okay, folks, I know we just heard a lot, and it sounds complicated, but in the end, with the facts, it's pretty simple. Common sense can play a very important role, especially in this case, when the facts are so clear that this defendant committed capital murder 3 times over. So, count 1, on or about the 21st of December, 2023, in Bexar County, Texas, the defendant, Christopher Preciado, intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Savanah Soto and Matthew Guerra by shooting them with a deadly weapon, a firearm, both murders during the same transaction. Now count 2, on or about the 21st day of December 2023 in Bexar County, Texas, the defendant, Christopher Preciado, intentionally or knowingly caused the death of the unborn child of Savanah Soto by shooting Savanah with a deadly weapon, a firearm, and the unborn child was younger than 10 years old. Count 3, on or about the 21st day of December 2023 in Bexar County, Texas, the defendant, Christopher Preciado, intentionally caused the death of Matthew Guerra by shooting him with a deadly weapon, a firearm, while in the course of committing or attempting to commit robbery of Matthew Guerra. So let's break down some of those parts in count 1. On or about. The reason we do on or about is exactly kind of like in situations like this where things might straddle midnight or something like that. It doesn't have to say, oh, it had to have been on the 21st or that's it. Because if it happened at 12 o'clock on the 22nd, we didn't meet it. No. The law allows that, gives that on or about exactly for situations like this. In Bexar County, Texas, there's no debate about that. Everyone says this happened in Bexar County. There's been no question about that. The defendant, Christopher Preciado, even through his own statement, has identified himself as being the actor in this case. Intentionally or knowingly. I'll break that down here in a second of the definitions of that, but it's either or. You don't all have to agree on intentionally, you don't all have to agree on knowingly, but it gives that option. Caused the death of Savanah Soto and Matthew Guerra by shooting them with a deadly weapon, a firearm, in both murders during the same criminal transaction. That's pretty clear here, folks. They are both killed in the same instant. There's no debate about that where one was killed and 3 days earlier or something like that in a completely unrelated incident. No. It is one act. So intentionally, a person acts intentionally or with intent with respect to the nature of his conduct or the result of his conduct when it is conscious, objective, or desire to engage in the conduct or cause the result. He intentionally put that gun to Matthew's head and pulled the trigger. And then he intentionally turned and shot Savanah. That's what happened. That's what the evidence shows. Knowingly. A person acts knowingly or with knowledge with respect to the nature of his conduct or circumstances surrounding his conduct when he is aware of the nature of his conduct or that circumstances exist. I'll give another example of this in a second, but knowingly, just like Melissa said during jury selection, whenever you toss if I toss this clicker into a crowded area, I'm going to hit someone. I know I'm going to hit someone. Just like shooting right at Matthew's head. I know I'm going to kill him. Count 2, caused the death of the unborn child of Savanah Soto, and the unborn child was younger than 10 years old. Like we said during jury selection, this isn't about politics. This is about an act by this defendant to shoot a 9 months pregnant woman in her head, who is someone who is very obviously pregnant, who anyone can tell is pregnant. And because of that, there's no way anyone knows that if you shoot her, you killed the child. Count 3. I'll talk about robbery. So robbery is if you're in the course of committing theft with intent to obtain or maintain control of property, he intentionally causes bodily injury to another. He shot Matthew in the head to take his property, to take those rings that he had Anthony Garcia pawn. You've seen that through the Instagram messages of their conversations, and then we've seen Anthony on surveillance pawning those rings for $300. 3 deaths for $300. But here's a note. You cannot rob someone in self-defense. The mugger doesn't get to claim self-defense as they're robbing you and you put up a fight. And they kill you. Oh man, I'm sorry, I was just defending myself as I was stealing his wallet. Doesn't make any sense. So the law doesn't apply to, the self-defense doesn't apply to robbery in this count. So how does that work? You start with count 1. You must all agree as to your verdict on count 1. Only then do you move to count 2, where you must reach a unanimous decision, and then you move to count 3, where again you must reach a unanimous decision. So you have to reach a unanimous decision for count 1, count 2, and count 3, each of them separately. Lesser included offense.
Your Honor, that is not the law. They have no obligation to reach a unanimous decision, as being stated by the counsel.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have a law on the charge, and that is what you'll follow. Go ahead, State.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, lesser included offenses. And one of the lesser included offenses is also murder. That is intentionally or knowingly causing the death of another individual. So you'll start, it'll give you count 1. You'll start at capital murder. And then it'll be murder, manslaughter, and criminally negligent homicide. And like I said, murder is the intentional killing of another individual. And I'll talk about that, of how this kind of plays into these counts. But manslaughter is recklessly causing the death of another individual. So when you recklessly cause the death of an individual, I usually think of that as in kind of vehicle cases where someone is going 120 miles an hour through a neighborhood and they hit someone. They're not intending to kill someone. They don't see the person, so it's not knowingly. But you're in a neighborhood. Like the risk is unjustifiable. Criminally negligent homicide. You causing the death of another with criminal negligence. Sometimes we see that in cases where a child is accidentally left in a hot car and the parent stays out too long and just doesn't realize what happened, but they should have known. So I'll just, reckless, it's a long definition, it'll be in there, but like I said, that example I just gave of a car speeding 120 miles an hour through a neighborhood. And now we have murder out here, but intentionally knowing and causing the death of another. Now I'll talk about criminal negligence, causing the death of another with criminal negligence, and that these definitions are super long and drawn out because, of course, as lawyers, we can't just give a simple definition. It has to be extreme, 5 sentences longer than it need to be. But you'll have that in your charge. So, count 1, capital murder of 2 individuals. Murder, only intentionally or knowingly causing the death of one of them. But that doesn't really, and just because this is here, you can then look at the facts. Let's look at the facts and start there. Because also, if you find beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty of capital murder, you stop there as far as count 1 is. You don't keep considering murder, manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, because once you find capital murder on count 1, you move to count 2. And that's what the evidence has shown. The evidence has shown that he intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Matthew Guerra and Savanah Soto. Because to get to murder, you have to unlink them. And the facts just don't do that. You have to say, he only intentionally caused the death of Matthew, or he only intentionally caused the death of Savanah. And the evidence just doesn't show that. It shows capital murder. And the same thing for manslaughter, something similar. In this case, for manslaughter, you believe that he only recklessly caused the death of Matthew and or Savanah. Criminal negligent, that he caused their deaths with criminal negligence. But again, the evidence just doesn't show that. It shows capital murder. Count 2, a child under 10 years old.
10 minutes, Counsel.
Thank you, Judge. That he caused the death, that he shot Savanah and caused the death of her unborn child as a result. That's what happened here. The other option is he recklessly shot Savanah and caused the death of an unborn child, or that he shot Savanah and caused the death of the unborn child with criminal negligence. Count 3, murder. Murder in the capital murder in the course of robbery. Again, like I said, the evidence is super clear that he did intend to commit this robbery. He needed those car parts. He needed the money. So he killed them. He waited for them to show up. He got in that car with the gun from his house, because that destroys his entire story. His entire story, Matthew having this gun, it doesn't make sense in reality when we know that gun came from his house. Murder, if you do not believe a robbery occurred, but you believe that the defendant intentionally killed Matthew's death. I mean, I had some typos on that one, I'll apologize. But basically, if you don't believe there was a robbery, but he intentionally caused Matthew's death. But that doesn't unlink Savanah. So even then, you still have count 1 on that, which he would still be guilty of capital murder. Manslaughter. No robbery occurs and the defendant recklessly causes Matthew's death. No robbery occurs and the defendant causes Matthew's death with criminal negligence. And here's my definition of criminal negligence. Again, super long definition. I'm not going to read it all out to y'all. It's in your charge. But again, the facts just don't support that. They support capital murder. And like I said earlier, you only move to a lesser included offense after you've agreed that he's not guilty of the charged offense. So if you agreed he is guilty as charged of capital murder, do not move to the lesser offense. Concurrent causation. This is another kind of complicated paragraph, and one of the examples I give is that someone is standing on the edge of a cliff and you walk up and kick them. Well, that's your fault because you kicked them. You're the cause of that. Your acts are clearly sufficient to cause them to fall off that cliff and die. But if they're leaning off that cliff and they take a step off and they're already this way and you just kind of wave your hands at them and wave the wind at them, that's clearly insufficient to cause them to fall because they're already falling. And in this case, in the charge, it mentions Matthew pulling the trigger. But that's only if we believe, you'd have to then believe that the gun was Matthew's. But we know that's not true. So in this case, it is very clear that Christopher Preciado was the cause of Matthew's death, of Savanah's death, and of Savanah's unborn child. Self-defense. So all 4 things are required to claim self-defense. Now the burden is on us. I want to be clear about that. The burden is on us to prove that he did not use self-defense. And we have. Many, many times over. We've proven that beyond a reasonable doubt. It does not even make sense in reality. Self-defense isn't even on the same planet as these facts. It has to be reasonable, it has to be immediately necessary, and in response to unlawful deadly force. If even one of those fails, you don't get self-defense. Because you have to be able, that chair has to have 4 legs, and to sit in that chair, it has to be an ordinary and prudent person. Nothing of what Christopher Preciado did was ordinary or prudent. It wasn't reasonable. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't immediately necessary for him to bring that gun and kill them all. And there was no unlawful deadly force. Matthew didn't have a gun. There is no other gun in that car. The only shell casings in that car belonged to the gun that was in the defendant's house that he brought into that interaction to kill them. And again, there's no self-defense for robbery. So that is his chair. It's blown up. It doesn't even make sense. We've proven each of these counts beyond a reasonable doubt. And we've proven that self-defense does not apply here beyond a reasonable doubt. Sympathy. As in the charge, you cannot let bias, prejudice, or sympathy factor in your decision. So that example in this case would be, well, the state proved the elements for capital murder but he's young, so I don't want to convict him of capital murder. That is not what we're here to decide. The decision is, did the state meet all of its elements? And if you believe, as I do, that we have met all of our elements for counts 1, 2, and 3, then he's guilty. That's it. So what you're likely going to hear next, Matthew is being violent. We've shown you there's no evidence of that. The evidence shows the exact opposite. Matthew was putting Christopher's life in danger. Again, it wasn't his gun. It was Christopher's gun. It came from his house. He had no other choice but to defend himself. From what? The executioner does not get to defend themselves. Savanah and her baby were an unfortunate casualty to Matthew's actions. No. It doesn't even make sense. The police messed up. They should have GSR'd Christopher after 13 days. Whose fault is that? That's Christopher. For taking that car and dropping it off in an apartment complex in the back of the parking lot where it wouldn't be reported for days. The state didn't meet their burden. We've met our burden 3 times over for each of these counts, and we've proven that self-defense does not apply. That's why you heard from so many witnesses. And then Detective Goodwin was able to bring it all in and bring it all together so that it is very, very clear that Matthew and Savanah had no idea what was waiting for them. Thank you.
Members of the jury, the facts of this case are actually not clear. The state's asking you to do something dangerous here. They're asking you to take a case full of gaps and fill it with assumptions and just call it proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not how our system works. That's guesswork with a life sentence attached. There can be no rush to judgment here, and what I told you in opening statement has come to pass, if you were paying attention, and I know you all were, to the evidence. We're not here to measure grief. We can recognize tragedy, but tragedy itself is not proof. We don't know what exactly happened in the vehicle that night. And that's the truth of it. We have a reconstruction. We know what they want you to believe. But all of the state's witnesses, including their experts, were unanimous. They don't know and can't tell you what happened in the vehicle that night. And that's the core problem of this case. We know certain facts that are beyond dispute. There's no DNA evidence of any kind linking Christopher Preciado to this capital murder. We know there's no gunshot residue. We heard that ad nauseum. There's no blood spatter evidence. There's no eyewitnesses. Plenty of videos, but there's no video where it actually counts and where it matters. There's no video of what happened in the vehicle that night. There's no trace evidence, no hair. Remember the testimony when I lay sticking things down, looking for anything I can find, and there's nothing that links Christopher Preciado to this capital murder. The state's theory is a reconstruction because they don't know what happened in this case. Now, when you evaluate the evidence, one thing we can agree on is that the charge of the court is the law that governs this case. It governs your deliberations. This is your roadmap. And when you look at this, because of how the evidence came out at this trial, the judge provided information not just on capital murder, but a number of lesser included offenses. And it's because of how the evidence came out at trial. It's not because of something we did as a defense. Please don't hold it against Christopher Preciado. Their evidence from their witnesses said you are to consider not just capital murder, but you can consider murder, you can consider manslaughter, you can consider criminally negligent homicide, and of course consider self-defense as well, because this is what came out from their evidence. Now, when you go through the different offenses, you see proof problems for some of the elements. And as we told you in jury selection, what the judge just read to you when she read the court's charge, which you are going to get a copy of when you go back, you know that the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt every single element of the offense charged. And if they fail to prove any one element, the only result, legally, is not guilty. And that's not defense argument. That's not something I made up. That's the law that the judge has given you. Now, when we look at capital murder and the charge here, here's the proof problem with that. The big proof problem. Intent. Intentionally and knowingly. Of course they're going to say we've proven all the elements. It's their reconstruction. Just take it, run with it, go. But we know there's no rush to judgment here because your duty is to look at the evidence. All of it. To read that court's charge. And to deliberate. And that's not something you do in a rush. Rushes are how mistakes get made. There can be no mistakes here with your decision. Recall the witnesses. We heard from Dr. Molina just yesterday. On cross-examination, she was crystal clear when my partner asked her, do these wounds, do they show intent? And she said, no, they do not. I can't speak to intent. In fact, I can't testify, I'm not testifying that Christopher intentionally shot anyone. She wasn't the only state's expert to say that. Or to say, back off and say, I can't give you any evidence of intent. That's a problem for the state. Because intent is what makes capital murder. That's what they have to prove. That's their burden that never shifts to the defense. And their own witnesses, their own experts, are telling you, I can't give that to you. You look at Mr. Saylor's, David Pendleton, the firearms examiner, saying the same thing, I can't give you intent. Mr. Pendleton said, I don't know if it was intentional or if it was accidental. All I can talk about is the firearm. I don't know anything about intent. And again, these are proof problems for these elements. We don't have forensic evidence that actually puts the gun in Christopher's hand when you look at DNA or fingerprints. Mr. Saylor's excluded Christopher from all the seized items in this case 19 times, according to my notes. I believe his reports are in evidence. I encourage you, double check me, read them. See for yourselves how often Christopher Preciado is excluded by DNA in this case. You remember that there was some testimony with Detective Goodwin where they tried to downplay DNA. I saw some facial expressions of surprise a little bit amongst you because it's surprising when the prosecutor is telling you DNA doesn't matter. Let's not look at DNA. They're doing that because they don't have it. They don't want you to focus on the fact that critical evidence they'd use in any other case, completely missing in this one, they don't want you to think about that because that's a problem. We know that there's no fingerprint evidence to prove that Christopher handled a gun at all. Not even the bullets. When we asked on cross-examination. I mean, even if you think someone wiped something down, they're not wiping bullets down. There's no fingerprint evidence to show that he handled a weapon or even ammunition in this case. And there's no evidence to show that he shot someone. Christina Vachon, I believe her name was, the GSR expert for the state. She talked about gunshot residue, and she said it can exist indefinitely on objects. They seized a lot of evidence from Christopher's house. There is no GSR of any kind. The only GSR you have before you that came out in evidence was for Matthew and Savanah. And the conclusion that Ms. Vachon testified to was that means that they either discharged a firearm, handled it, or in close proximity. All are equally possible. Well, that doesn't help the state. If it's all possible, then we don't know exactly what it was. We don't know exactly what happened. We just know there's no GSR where Christopher's concerned. And there's no credible evidence that he shot anyone with intent to kill. You just don't have that. That's just a conclusion they'd like you to reach because it makes proving their case easier. But you don't have evidence of that. You're missing intent, you're missing the firearm, or the fact that Christopher's a shooter. You're missing elements that need to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt before conviction can be had. And if you go from capital murder to murder, you have the same proof problems, especially with intent, because both of those crimes require intentionally or knowingly, and you don't have that. When you go to manslaughter, now arguably this lesser included offense fits the evidence better. Because now it's reckless conduct. And I encourage you to read the definition. It's a long one, but read it. Because now you don't have to care about intent. There is no more intentionally. So they don't have that proof problem when it comes to manslaughter. Read the definition to decide how reckless it is for this situation in the car. Is it reckless to struggle with someone who's got a gun? To hit a hand? To fight over it? Knowing that you're in an enclosed space with two people? Arguably, that's your decision. You're the fact finders. We still don't have forensic evidence that puts a gun in his hand or says Christopher's shooting anybody, but now you don't have that intent issue anymore. It's the same for criminally negligent homicide. You don't have to worry about intent. You just change from reckless to whether or not he ought to have been aware of a risk. Because now criminal negligence, you can cover accident. And there is evidence in the record where some of the people are testifying, I don't know whether this is intentional or reckless or accidental. It could be all of these things. I don't know. So criminal negligence can be supported as well. We know that Christopher gave a statement to police. He was always cooperative. He told the detective what happened in the car. He's the only person there. I know the state doesn't want to think about what he says happened because Matthew has a gun. Matthew points the gun at him in this enclosed space. Gun in the face. It's a human reaction. The law allows you to defend yourself. Try to, and he tells him, I hit his hand, you know? He describes it. The detective didn't ask many questions about the details about that struggle that occurred. But he did say it was Matthew's finger on the trigger. Death occurs, it sounds like a chaotic event. But he's telling you what happened, and the law allows you to defend yourself. You don't lose the right to defend yourself just because you're in an enclosed space or just because it's a drug deal and you were looking to buy marijuana. You don't lose the right to defend yourself. In addition to the elements the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, they have to disprove self-defense as well. The problem for them is that since we don't know exactly what happened in that vehicle and you have problems trying to prove your case, that means also you have problems trying to disprove self-defense. Because we know from the testimony, especially Dr. Molina, you can have a contact wound as part of a struggle. That's possible. She kept testifying as to what was possible. You can have this with self-defense. To be fair, though, she did testify that she can't always tell struggle from wounds alone. She can't tell intent at all. She was just clear that she is not testifying that Christopher intentionally shot anyone. The state entered a lot of evidence in this case, but it's not about the quantity of evidence they enter, it's the quality. It's what do they actually prove. I would submit to you that a lot of their evidence was filler. The first 10 witnesses that testified in this trial, if you recall, never identified Christopher Preciado, never even mentioned his name in all the testimony they gave. You got to put something up when you don't have a lot, when you know you're weak on the elements. Because this reconstruction, if they're talking about angles, and we know through Detective Goodwin or Dr. Molina, here's a mock replica of a gun. Let's talk about the angles. That's a reconstruction. Angles really means we think it could have happened this way. That's not science by any stretch of the imagination. That's opinion. That's their theory. Angles don't tell you what happened. They tell you what some people think might have happened. And that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. All the experts were very clear. And we know that when they processed all the information, all the evidence they had, very little links Christopher Preciado to actual intentional capital murder. That's what they don't have. Now, when you look at the charge, you're not going to find anything in here that tells you or allows for it feels like, or it could have been, or it probably was. That's not the burden of proof in this case. The charge does instruct you on certain key points that I want to emphasize. Do not let bias, prejudice, or sympathy play any part in reaching your verdict. And from our perspective, you can't vote guilty or vote against Christopher because you don't like him or you don't approve of his lifestyle. You can't vote against him because you feel sympathy or you feel bad for the victims in this case. And it is a tragedy. But the law is clear. Your verdict must come from the evidence or the lack of it. You're governed by the law that's contained in the court's charge. The burden of proof, we know, stays with the state. The judge told you herself all people are presumed innocent. That presumption alone is enough to acquit or find someone not guilty. That's also in the charge. This will be a difficult case. I told you that at the beginning, because you have to separate tragedy from intent, suspicion from certainty. What's not in this court's charge is anything saying, go deliberate and come back with a decision that makes you feel good. You're not going to read anything that says, go out and deliberate, come back with a verdict that pleases people or pleases the state of Texas. That's not your duty. It's a powerful, powerful thing to be a juror. You've never had this much power in your life over another person. Your vote in this case to convict must be unanimous, but no one can force you to vote one way or the other. Each of you has an individual vote that is yours alone. Your duty is to review the evidence, judge the credibility of witnesses, and return a true verdict. And that is what we ask of you. My partner and I ask you to return a verdict of not guilty after you examine all of the evidence in this case. And remember, that's not leniency or technicality, that's due process that protects all of us. Now, my partner is going to talk to you some more about the evidence and why a not guilty verdict is the verdict that makes sense in this case.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Christopher Preciado is not guilty. And you've heard all this evidence that points that way. Let's just start talking. Normally I don't read stuff because I like to just talk. But I was questioning all these witnesses, particularly because of the evidence that they had in the case. And I wanted to make sure that when they were presenting their evidence, that I would elicit from these experts and these investigators and these detectives as to what exactly they did have in the case. Because we wrote a list, and I wrote a list here. So there is no eyewitness. There's no one here that is an eyewitness to this case. No one. There's no video. There's never a video anywhere inside that vehicle. There's no GoPros. There's no hidden video anywhere that shows what happened. There's no gunshot residue, and you heard Ms. Vachon testify that that gunshot residue can stay. There's no DNA. And on almost every TV show that I watch and almost every case we get, There's always some kind of DNA, and the DNA will do you in. There is no DNA to show that Chris was part of this transaction. There was a transaction for the sale of drugs, marijuana, but they're not a transaction in terms of him going in and being present in all of this thing. And I want you to look at those reports because you're going to get all that evidence when you go back to the back. There's no blood evidence pointing to Christopher. There have some ballistics, but no one can tell you who had their finger on the trigger. There's no trace evidence. There's no fingerprint evidence. And there's no blood splatter evidence. What we have is a lot of interpretations, but not a lot of actual physical evidence for y'all to take back. In my great state of Texas, you are allowed to defend yourself. You're allowed to defend yourself. That's why I live here. I don't live in California where they have all these rules and stuff on guns. If someone's attacking me, I'm allowed to defend myself. And every one of y'all here are as well. When we narrow this case down, though, it seems like there's a real lot of bad parenting going on here. Christopher is this 19-year-old stoner gamer who's sitting there. When they picked up his possessions from his room, he has a sweatshirt that says, "Virginity Rocks." It's in the pictures. Can't find it right now, but they showed it to you all. This is the kind of guy that they're saying is a stone-cold executioner, to use Miss Albin's word when she started this case, that these people were executed. They're saying that guy is an executioner. She showed you pictures at the very beginning of Matthew holding a gun. When you look through those Instagrams, which there's a lot of stuff to look through, there's a picture of Matthew holding a gun. Matthew holding a long arm, Matthew holding an extended clip. When I was a young prosecutor, I put that kind of guy in jail. And now here, we're calling him a great guy, a family man. He was going to have a baby the next day. They showed you video of Matthew walking in his apartment complex, looking all cool with his track little uniform on or whatever he was wearing. And he's happy as a clam because he just made 2 drug deals on video right in front of God and everyone. He's just walking around like, hey, more money. I don't got to pay taxes on this money. IRS don't even know that I'm making cash.
It's object to facts, not an evidence, Your Honor. It's the state.
You can infer from looking at that video what he's doing. The Mercedes-Benz, that I'm sure did not live at that apartment complex, and a Toyota, and he's walking out there and then he's walking back in to go pick up his pregnant girlfriend and take her to another drug deal. That's what he's doing. But they want to portray him as this really great family man, this guy who's going to have a baby the next day. Parenting gone wrong? She's mom. Savannah's a mom. Like, she's going to have a baby the next day? They're supposed to be going in a matter of hours, and she makes a decision to go to a drug deal? Does she not watch TV? Every time you turn on TV and you're seeing some kind of show, whether it's reality or whether it's some kind of a made-for-TV movie or whatever, drug deals go bad. I mean, even in their apartment, he has a big poster of Scarface. Even that little medal that he wears is a tribute to Scarface. And at the end of Scarface, Scarface is no longer around. So it's like Scarface meets the Queen of the South, and she joins the family business too. I didn't even know until Detective Goodwin, who was the lead detective on Savannah's brother's death, and he said that Ethan was killed in a drug deal gone bad. So she had a preview of what could happen, and she still made the choice to go with Matthew that night and go sell drugs. And granted, it's marijuana. I know some people have really strong feelings about marijuana, that maybe it should be legal, but at this point in Texas, it is not. It is not. And unfortunately, things happen. We don't know what happened. You have to look at the evidence and you have to decide what happened. What we do know is that 2 people were shot. What we do know, it's inside a car. And what we do know, there's not a lot of witnesses because the only person who said anything about it is Christopher. And he does not say that he pulled the trigger. He said that Chris says that Matthew had the gun and that the gun was pointed on a certain way. And the Detective Goodwin, he said, it's virtually impossible to commit that type of a shot. But yet, he got on the stand, and he used a little gun thing. I don't know, I think he took it back with him. But he used a little gun thing, and then he did it himself. He set the example. He said, virtually impossible to do that, but then he showed me that it's possible. So, if Detective Goodwin can make it happen, and he's not in there, is it possible it happened the way it's said? Yes, because he demonstrated that to you. He's an experienced detective. And apparently he's assigned to the cases involving the Soto family, because he said he investigated Ethan Soto and his murder, and now he's investigating Savanah Soto. So I made notes of the questions that I asked the folks that testified that I was questioning. So I talked to the forensic analyst, Detective Knox, and I said, question, your job is to pull data, not determine what it means in real life. Yes. You're not a fact witness. I am not. Were you present for any of the events involving the victim or my client? No. Cellbrite is a tool that copies data from a phone. Yes. To extract things like text, images, and app data. Yes. It does not create new information. It only pulls what's stored on the device. Yes. And what it pulls depends on what's actually stored on the phone at the time. Yes. If something has been deleted, it may not be recoverable. Correct. Especially when new systems. The data can be deleted permanently. Yes. So in your report, it doesn't show everything that ever existed on that phone. Correct. I think that's important because they had access to these phone records and they didn't go back and check and see, hey, who's making these transactions? Oh, it's Matthew. I wonder who else he's selling to. Let's see what his demeanor is when he goes over there to sell to them. Does he ever get angry? Does he ever get, revengeful? Does he ever try to make commentary? Do we have these other witnesses that are on these phones to come and say, this is how he acts? So he also talked about that this data, I said the data is based on things like cell towers or app data, but not always GPS, correct? And it doesn't show a person's exact location because sometimes the GPS isn't working properly, correct? And it cannot tell you where inside that vehicle a person is sitting. That is correct also. So no one knows how these folks were seated in this vehicle. What they know is that when they recovered it, Matthew was in the back seat, Savanah is in the front seat, and there's a car carrier. We don't know where Chris is at, and we also don't know if there was anyone else in that vehicle. Chris didn't tell anybody, but there's 2 unknown samples according to the DNA person, and we want you to take all that evidence and look at it, because he's right. I think it was 19 times they said Christopher is excluded, but there's 2 unknowns back there. Also in Chris's statement, when he says to the police, when the transaction's done and I take the car and I leave it there at the apartment, the car's unlocked. The state wants you to believe that this was robbery for car parts, that he killed people for car parts. The car part conversation, again, in those Instagrams that they introduced, I didn't. They're talking about car parts way in advance. This is way before any type of murder occurred. It wasn't like, oh, you know what? I have a brilliant idea. Tomorrow, I'm going to go order some weed. I'm going to have this guy come over. I know he carries a lot of cash. I know he's loaded. He always has this and that. So let me go ahead and rob him for some car parts. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you be talking about that way in advance? I also asked about the timestamps in the phone data depend on the phone's internal clock. That is correct. It can be affected by settings and network issues. Correct. But it's not always exact to the second in real world terms. Correct. And I also asked him, so you took messages off that phone, including the apps like Instagram? Yes. And you can look at those Instagrams and see when these guys are talking about stuff. And you can see from all these Instagrams that they had access to a bunch of stuff. The other thing that I think is really important is they want you to also believe that everything that's on somebody's Instagram is the truth. Like nobody on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or any of those applications ever take stuff from somebody's and post it as their own. So if somebody wants to be a braggart and they see some picture they like, they can go and they can take it and they can post it on Instagram. That evening, it wasn't Matthew that was texting on this Instagram and messaging. It's Savanah.
Facts not in evidence, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, you recall the facts from the witness stand.
There's only one phone recovered, and that is Savanah Soto's phone. That's what the detective said, and that's what the Instagram guy took off Detective Knox. It's her phone. And he's supposed to be driving. I'm going to assume that he is using the detective's words. I'm using a detective analysis is what he said, that if he's driving, he's probably not texting to go to where he is at. So if it's Savannah's phone and those messages are on his Instagram, on her phone, she's probably the one messaging and saying, hey, we're getting close. But look at that. You can't just assume that just because I'm registered to this account, just because it is my phone or just because it's my Instagram, that somebody else can't be writing on it. If she's writing on his Instagram, it shows that anybody could be writing on whatever Instagram, could be a braggart. I asked Detective Goodwin a lot of questions. So I wrote all these down so I could refresh my recollection. Question: no one saw Christopher shoot either victim, correct? Answer: correct. There's no eyewitness who says, I saw him pull the trigger, correct? Correct. There's no video capturing that shooting inside the vehicle. Is that correct? Correct. I asked him about the DNA evidence. Did you talk to Mr. Sailors ahead of time? Didn't he tell you that Chris is excluded 19 times from the DNA? Yes. So you know that the items that are from the vehicle that is supposed to be the victim, including the inside of the car, had been tested for DNA. Yes. And you know that they tested the items from the back seat area of the car. Yes. And you know that all the tested items that were given to him were part of the investigation, and they were looking for DNA. Yes. Do you consider Mr. Sailors a competent forensic scientist? Yes, of course. He's great at his job. Mr. Sailors concluded that Christopher Preciado was excluded from all items given to him for DNA testing. And when he could not reach a conclusion, he said that too. Were you aware of that? Yes. Excluded means Christopher's DNA was not present on those items. Correct. So scientifically, Christopher was not shown to have handled or touched items in the back seat. Correct. The handgun believed to be involved in the shooting was also tested for DNA. Yes. So you know that the DNA evidence did not come back to Christopher Preciado. Correct. So the DNA testing on that gun does not identify Christopher as the shooter. Correct. There was no gunshot residue evidence that links Christopher to this capital murder, does it? Correct. It does not scientifically prove that Christopher ever handled the gun. Correct. In fact, the DNA evidence cannot tell us at all who fired that gun. Correct. And there is no fingerprint evidence tying Christopher to that gun. Yes. So from a forensic standpoint, there is no scientific proof that Christopher fired the gun. Correct. And you interviewed Christopher at the incident. After the incident. Yes. And he denied carrying a gun. That's correct. And he denied shooting anyone. That's correct. And you knew he was there to buy marijuana. Correct. Did he ever admit to intentionally killing anyone? No. Wound characteristics alone do not identify who fired the gun, do they? No. So a wound can look intentional regardless of who pulled the trigger. Yes. It could also look reckless regardless of who pulled the trigger. Yes. A wound can look accidental regardless of who pulled the trigger. Yes. And you can tell distance from gunshot wounds, but not the intent. Yes. And if you try to guess the intent from the wound, would that require speculation or guesswork? Yes. So you're trying to reconstruct the offense because there's no eyewitnesses or forensic evidence to prove who did what. Isn't that the case? And he says correct. And I asked him more about this. Your wound interpretation does not scientifically identify Christopher as the shooter. Correct. The timeline in this case is reconstructed from surveillance timestamps and inference. Correct. So you have Matthew going in vehicles to places based upon that Instagram GPS locator. Yes. But there is no video of who's driving Matthew's vehicle. No. And there's no footage showing what happened inside Matthew's vehicle during the shooting. No. When I asked, and inferences require assumptions, doesn't it? And he said he doesn't believe that he's making any assumptions. He called it detective deductions. My concern is that they rushed to judgment on this because they figured out that Chris had been talking to Matthew and that he was making drug transactions. They didn't go back and talk to any of the other customers, so to speak. But on that day, they were sure, because once they found that car, it had to be him. When they talked to him and he gave them the story to the best of his knowledge, they said, no, that's not true. You did this. You know, they brought in a lot of other witnesses. One of my favorites was Savanah's bestie, that she identified that she knew Matthew and she knew Savanah, and they used to hang out, and that they were very flashy. And when I asked, okay, so you would go to their house? Yeah, I would go and hang out with them. We'd have a great time. I said, okay, so did you partake in any of their activities? And then she pled the fifth, and I couldn't ask her any more questions. Same thing with this guy who pawned those rings. He pled the fifth, or supposedly pled the fifth. We couldn't ask him any questions either. Seems like there's a lot of people that are involved and some unknown factors in here, but yet the state of Texas wants you to come back with a guilty on capital murder. All the swabs you saw, there's bags and bags and bags of swabs. Pictures and pictures and pictures. But nothing biologically or scientifically connects Christopher to any of this activity. They have some footage. They have video footage. And they go into his house. And they go into his room. And they go and grab a whole bunch of stuff. Some shirts, some shorts, some shoes. But they didn't grab a whole bunch of drugs. And they didn't grab a whole bunch of money. And then they're looking for this gun. And they don't find it in Christopher's room. They have to go to another room that belongs to his daddy. The door is locked. Mom doesn't even know where the key's at. You can watch all this on video again. Mom has to find the key, get into the room, go into a closet, and down on the bottom in a bag that's sealed is a gun that's registered to Ramon. I gotta give props to the state of Texas finding a witness from 1999 who was with Ramon Preciado to come in and say, yeah, I bought the gun for us when we were together. The gun's his, the house is his, the truck is his, the room is his, everything is his, but they don't investigate him. They only say, it's gotta be Chris. Chris bought some weed. Chris brought some weed. But they want you to say that he was robbed. And they don't find any proof of anything from inside that house, except for some rings that this Anthony guy is pawning. And then, on top of that, they have that Burla thing, which kind of freaked me out, because, I mean, that's a lot of evidence and a lot of, like, information on everybody that's driving around. But they show them one day, and they go into the Sam's Club over there on 410 and Evers. They stay there for a little bit. And then the truck is still driving, and it goes to Frost Bank. Frost Bank. It's pretty close by there. I think it's Babcock and 410. And they go to Whataburger, and then they go to Popeyes. And then they go home. Question. Did you get the bank records from the Frost Bank? No, we didn't. Don't you think it would have been interesting if there was a whole stack of money It got deposited into Ramon Preciado's account. Wouldn't that be interesting information to have? Oh, we didn't need that. We already decided it was Chris. Okay. And they want you to say that it's robbery because he was going to go do some other business later on. But if you're going to go somewhere later on to go do something and they all live within the same proximity, you got time to go home and pick up your stuff and not take all your stuff with you, because sometimes drug deals go bad and people can steal your product or your money. So you should probably leave it at home. You go do your drop off and you go back home and pick up what you need for the next one. And then you go and do that later on. So it's very possible there was nothing else in the car except for the stuff that he was going to sell to Chris. Again, these are all speculations and assumptions that the state wants you to make to go from here to here. Let's give them the maximum. Let's give them the capital murder today. No. They also want to point out to you that on Instagram, Christopher is texting a friend of his that lives at the apartments where he dropped off the car. Makes sense that if the car is dropped off there, that he may know some people there at that apartment complex. They're like, oh, he went back. There's no video of him going into that apartment, but he went back there. That looks suspicious. Does it? He's probably been there before. Why else would he go there to drop off a car? And the other thing
That's
is,
not in evidence, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, you recall the evidence from the witness stand.
he could have very well have gone to go visit a friend. Again, they want you to make assumptions. You can make assumptions a different way. You know, it's a lot of things to talk about, and I could stand here and rehash this thing all day. But the bottom line is that Savanah entered the family business, and she and Matthew took the business to another level. And they were dealing up in the neighborhood. And now the state wants you to think they're these innocent victims that didn't know what's going on, and that my guy is this executioner in a brutal murder, a double homicide, a triple homicide, some type of homicide. On this night, things went errant. They went awry. Things went crazy. We don't know what happened. What we do know is that it resulted in the death of the dope dealer and his associate, and the baby that they should have protected by staying home. And it's very terrible that the child had to be incidental because mom and dad made a bad choice. Did Chris do something foolish? Yeah, he listened to his dad when his dad tells him not to call the police and tell him what happened, because you are
That's not in
allowed to do.
evidence, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, you recall the evidence from the witness stand. What the attorneys say is not evidence.
When he did not call the police and tell them that he had done this to protect himself, because that in Texas is legal, and that is our law today. Is he guilty of capital murder? Absolutely not. I'm going to ask you to be very careful and review every single thing from there. Consider it, discuss it, and stick to your guns. However you feel, I will respect your decision. But in my opinion, after looking at all this stuff, it's a lot of hype and not a lot of substance. And Christopher is not guilty of capital murder or any type of offense. Thank you.
May I have a moment just to set up?
Yes,
your-
ma'am.
Your Honor, how much time do I have?
We have about 45, 50 minutes.
Oh. All right, thank you. May it please the court,
Yes, ma'am.
opposing counsel, members of the jury. When we started this trial, I introduced you to Savanah Soto and Matthew Guerra and their baby Fabian. And we did not shy away from the fact that Matthew dealt drugs to make money. We were not hiding from that. We didn't stand up here and try to paint them as these angelic people who never made mistakes. I think I actually said, you're going to hear they made mistakes. Those were my words. And those you have heard. But that doesn't mean that they deserve what happened to them. That does not justify the execution that this man perpetrated on them. It doesn't. We all make mistakes. They've made some. He's made some. We've all made some. It does not justify what happened. Now, the defense wanted to take apart our case because Mr. Esparza said we brought you filler witnesses. If we hadn't brought them to you, they would have been up here yelling, where are all those witnesses? Why didn't they bring them? We had to set the stage. We had to tell you the story of how this happened. And we brought you over 30 witnesses so that you could see we're not hiding anything. We are giving you everything that we've got. Everything that we can. Video, pictures, forensics, GPS, a murder weapon, social media. We've given you so much evidence over the last week and a half so that we could paint you a picture of what happened in that car. Because I think it's interesting that both defense counsels say, we don't know what happened in that car when their client gave a statement. So essentially their client isn't telling the truth because they don't even know what happened in that car. But I agree with them there because it's very clear that the statement that their client gave was a lie. It was a lie after a lie after a lie. And we're going to talk about that. But with all of that evidence that we have brought you, you can see Christopher is not this virginity rocks innocent guy that they want you to think he is. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The audio. All right. Technical difficulties as usual. It's the first time he's talked about it. Come on. We all know that is an act. You know that because of everything that we proved to you he did and he said in between the days that he murdered all three of them and then was caught by the police. And there's no evidence in the record that Ramon told him not to call the cops. There's no evidence of that. All we know is that he didn't and his parents helped him. That's what we know. But we also know from all of the evidence, Matthew wasn't afraid of Chris. Look at these text messages right before he goes to meet him. They're friendly. He calls him fam. Christopher says, yo, what's up? There is no agitation on the part of Matthew, like Christopher wanted the detective to think. He said agitated 17 times. There was none of that. There was an agreement to meet because Chris had asked for $620 worth of something, which is much, much more than he told the detective he normally gets. Why do you think that is? And why do you think we didn't find it in the car? Mr. Esparza talked about intent. Well, we talked about that in jury selection. We told you there is no way for us to take a brain scan and give you the visual of what someone is intending. Intent can be inferred. And that is why we brought you piece after piece after piece after piece of evidence. So you had more than enough to get to the conclusion of what actually happened that night. Just like that puzzle piece, or that puzzle that I showed you in jury selection. You don't need every single piece of the puzzle to be able to see what it is. And I mean, ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect to defense counsel, we have filled in that puzzle so many ways. So many ways. We've brought you evidence that we don't normally have to give you as little question about what happened that night. And these text messages prove Matthew was not agitated. Matthew was not scared. Matthew was perfectly fine. Chris was the one. He was the one on pins and needles waiting for them to arrive, because these text messages show he's asking him, where are you at? Update. And the whole time he's texting him, he's outside pacing with his hand on his forehead. Where are they? Walking up and down the driveway. Go back and watch the videos. There's multiple clips of this because the detectives did their jobs. They got almost 200,000 videos from that home that Detective Goodwin watched painstakingly so he could give you a clear understanding of what happened. And that man is pacing up and down, waiting for them to arrive. He is anxious and he is nervous because he knows what's in his hand and he knows what he is about to do. But Savanah and Matt didn't. They had no idea what they were walking into. Because to Matt, Chris was nothing more than a sheep. He didn't see him as a threat. He didn't know he was a wolf underneath. And they walked into an ambush. But you know that he went unafraid because he was unarmed. He did not have a gun. And Mr. Esparza wanted to conveniently forget the fact that the gun that killed these three people was Ramon's. Unless you want to believe by some crazy twist of fate, in the 25 years the gun had been with that man, he lost it, somehow wound up in the hands of one of Chris's friends, and then Chris lied when he told the detective, I didn't touch the gun, I didn't take the gun, I don't know anything about the gun. And it wound up in the mom's locked closet. And yeah, that was weird. She couldn't find the keys to her own room until the detective said, we're gonna take it off the hinges if you don't let us in. Oh, okay, I know where they are. This is not rocket science. It is common sense, like Ross said. You don't check your common sense at the door. You look at the totality of the circumstances and you put it all together. And you can see what actually happened. So you know, because that car was locked when we found them, and that there was no gun in that car, you know Matthew was unarmed. What we did find in that car were some bullets, projectiles, and the only gun that they came back to was Ramon's. And yeah, we found Alicia. We found her because we thought you deserved to know what we do. That Matthew did not bring that gun. Matthew did not show up to a drug deal with the intention of robbing anybody. And not only do we know the gun that we found in the home belonged to the Preciado family, we know it's the murder weapon. And the math works also. Because if you remember, there were 2 magazines with the gun. One of them had 5 bullets, full. The other one had 2. So there were 3 missing. a bullet through Matthew's head, which is in the headliner, a bullet that was stuck in Savanah's head, and then a loose bullet underneath Matthew's body. That makes 5. We got 1 shell casing for whichever bullet that hit either Matthew or Savanah, we don't know. And 1 casing is gone. But I bet we can all guess where it went.
Objection to, that's not in evidence, Your Honor.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, you recall the evidence from the witness stand.
So how else do we know Matthew went to that encounter unarmed? Chris told you. He told everybody. He told the world. Matthew got killed without a gun. They low-key caught Flacco lacking. He was always strapped. He always had a gun. So why was it different this time? And he posted that December 27th at about 4 a.m. I converted it. So that's 12 hours after their bodies were found, before the press release goes out on the 28th, before much time for any reporting has passed. He knows a whole lot about what happened to Matthew. And he's bragging. When he's making these posts, nobody knows except for Christopher and his parents. Nobody knows what he did. So he can brag about it and talk about it and get away with it in his head. But being a wolf in sheep's clothing is not enough for him. He wants to be a wolf in wolf's clothing. And you know that from these posts. He told the detective, I didn't usually like to get drugs from Matthew because he posted all these scary pictures of himself holding guns. Exhibit A. Does anybody recognize that doll? Holding a gun? With his Instagram name carved into his hand? It kind of blows up his claims that he was afraid of Matthew because he posted pictures with guns. I'm sorry. He said on December 27th around 11:32 p.m., you ain't catching me like Flacco and his baby mama. Pull up and try something. And then he tells Anthony, I'm always strapped up now. I ain't even from any of these gangs or shit. People just be on some fuck shit during the holidays. Well, I don't know what fuck shit means, but I bet he does, because he murdered 3 people right before Christmas. Those are his words. He wants these people seeing his posts that he's talking to on Instagram, he wants them to think he's some hard-ass, big tough guy. Because he's not in real life. But he wants people to think he is. So he makes up this ridiculous story that he tells Anthony about getting arrested by Leon Valley, which was complete BS. Although he claims that he got into some legal trouble just a few hours after he executed a whole family. He just changes the facts a little bit. But enough so that he can tell Anthony how cool he is. He got caught with all these drugs and they took my profit stack. He's creating this persona for himself online that he wants other people to buy into. And he's doing all of that while the police are investigating. While we are trying to find out what happened to Matthew and Savanah and Fabian and get them and their family justice, while we are doing all of that, he's bragging and chest puffing and trying to make plays and grow his bread off the guy who's due in pounds that he just put in the ground. That's what he's doing until the cops get to him. And then all of a sudden, he's so scared. He's never talked about it before. Give me a break. So let's talk about how we can see through all of his facade. How we know what his intent was. How you all know that we proved every single one of those capital murder counts. Let's start with all of his lies. Defense counsel made some lists and told you about them while they were up here. I made a list too. Last night, I made a list of all the lies that Christopher told when I was working on this. And I lost count at 20. So let's just talk about some of them.
But you know what this is all about too, right? Bill, have any idea why we're taking the truck, why we're contacting the folks? What video are you referencing?
The case I video, the one that they played on the news.
The one with the pregnant girl that was missing? Okay. You know anything about that?
It wasn't that. It was a truck. It was just they said they found a suspect.
Okay. But you know anything about that? Call them? Okay.
Call?
Yeah, the
I
call.
didn't get a call.
No, and for us, it was like a police call is what it,
I saw it on the news.
but do you know what it was a reference to? Okay.
I really think he's up to the rules. I think he's probably on the news.
Who else lives here to talk?
I haven't really been keeping up with the news. I think we all know that's not true. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but he definitely did a little research of his own. Texting some friends, hey, what happened? Have you heard from Flacco? He hasn't been in touch with me after the news of their bodies being found broke. He knows exactly what's going on. But he's telling the detectives, oh, I don't know anything. And then, of course, a few hours later, he goes to headquarters and he has a completely different story.
I mean, you could look at the lives. There's no playback recording. There are no. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What do they look at?
There are no playback recordings. I have 200,000 videos that say otherwise. That show you exactly what he was doing that night. And with all due respect to Ms. Guerrero, she wants to say that this was Ramon. How do we know this wasn't Ramon? How come we didn't look at Ramon? Because Ramon was inside his house. When Christopher went outside and got in the car with Savanah and Matthew and shot them in the head. He was inside the house. That's on video. Why would we do anything else about that part of this? It's on video that he wasn't in the house. You see him on video running outside, picking up the phone of a call from Christopher after he shot them. We know it was Christopher. There's no guesswork there. When he gave his interview to the detective, he did tell the detective about his Zans from CBS account. He said he deleted it just a couple days after it happened. That's not true. He didn't even mention the OD with me, por favor account, where we got a lot of the information that we provided you. And when he asked Matthew to come over to his house on December 21st, Matthew confirmed. It's going to be $620 cash, right, bro? Not the $60 or $70 that he told Detective Goodwin that he was anticipating spending. And then Matthew asks him, how many hundreds do you have? Why do you think he asked him for that much? And why do you think we didn't find it? It's very just simple. You just connect the dots. It's not as complicated as they want you to think it is. When you think about that and when you read those messages and you take that into account with all of the messages that we saw where he needs car parts, and it was not way in advance of the murders. Because if you'll remember, and they're in here somewhere, if you'll remember, he's telling Anthony, I'm going to get you your money. Can you? Thursday was the night of the murder. Friday was the next day. He's talking about needing the car parts, saying he's going to give them his money after he killed Matthew and Savanah. That's how you know he planned this. He knew what he was doing. We talked about the gun in the room. Obviously that was a lie. That he's afraid of guns and he was afraid of Matthew because he posted pictures with guns. And on Savanah's phone, there are 111 device notifications that involve one of his profiles, Sans from CVS or XXV11. 111. Just between November 28th and December 21st. He's not afraid of that man. He was not afraid of him. He was more than happy to watch Matthew post over and over all those stacks of money, all his jewelry and rings. He was more than happy to see him post all of that so he could plot and plan and prepare to take all of it away from him. And then his life. And then the life of his pregnant girlfriend, because she's a witness and you can't leave her behind. You also know he lied about what he did with Matthew. Because contrary to what the defense wants you to think, we did bring you DNA. We did bring you forensics. We did bring you scientific evidence, and that is Matthew's blood on the outside of the car. How did that get there? That's Matthew's blood on that bloody money that was found right outside of Chris's house. Unless he lied. And he pulled Matthew out of the car, and then he pulled him back in from the back seat. He also said that when he saw, allegedly, Matthew's arm come around and shoot Savanah. He said that he saw Savanah bleeding on her left side. And I mean, if that were true, that would make sense. But her injury's not on her left side. Her injury's on the right side. And all the blood that you see that came from Savanah is on the right side. Which is, again, proof that he is lying. Proof that this whole story about Matthew accidentally shooting Savanah when he pushed the gun away is crap. You also know he lied because he said that when his dad came to get him, he was alone. Sure wasn't. He also said his parents didn't know what he was doing, what they were going to help him. Why is Ramon bringing a giant towel? These are common sense questions that reasonable people can answer through inference, given all of the evidence that we have given you. He said he didn't let his dad look in the car. His dad didn't know. His dad didn't wipe anything down. His dad wasn't a part of this. He just picked him up and he wouldn't even let him see. Myrta throws the towel. Ramon comes and starts wiping, standing right in the doorway. And then Chris stands up so he can get a clear view. These are lies that prove that you can't trust anything he said about that night. Especially the trajectories, the way that the shooting happened. Absolutely you can't trust that. And not just because we know he's a liar, but because of the physical evidence. And because of what Dr. Molina said and Detective Goodwin said. You know it didn't happen the way he said it happened. He also said he didn't take anything from the car or from Matthew. We see Matthew walking in his apartment complex around 10:05 p.m. That's about an hour and 45 minutes before he's dead. And we have this Instagram post from Matthew's account at around 9:02 with those rings. The very same rings that we introduced into evidence. The night he was murdered. And they were gone. They were gone, and somehow he's messaging a friend of his about them on Instagram. And these aren't generic gold bands. These are very specific rings. That's not a coincidence either. Hey bro, can I throw collateral for the parts? December 22nd. That's hours after he murdered them. And then we know he sent a picture, but he deleted it because we saw in the whole return there was an attachment that wasn't a part of the return. Other one, since there's a big ass ruby in the middle. And then he tells him it's 2 rings. I'm pretty sure one of them is a Versace ring, and if you'll remember, Diego testified to that Versace engraving because he was with Matthew when he got that ring. But I'm not too sure. I got my own jewelry. They're from someone else. This shit was given to me. I want you to think about what it took for him to remove those rings from Matthew's lifeless body. Think about that. Think about the effort and the purpose that he had to be doing this with. Because we know from that surveillance video, he and his parents were back there for a while. Now, when you say 4 or 5 minutes, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I played that video on purpose so we could all sit here in awkward silence and feel how long that really is. How much can actually be accomplished in that time. Especially if you've got 3 people working together because they all have towels and hoodies to wipe everything down. So, no, we don't have DNA because they destroyed it. That is a fact. He even stated he wiped it down. And I know Monica said that, you know, in all the TV shows I've seen, there's DNA. Well, we heard from Christina Vachon, TV isn't real. We heard from Dr. Molina, TV isn't real. What you see on TV and crime scene shows and true crime movies isn't real. I wish it were because we would be able to finalize a lot of cases a lot faster. We sit around waiting for results all the time. And sometimes they don't come. Because like Mr. Saylors told you, it would have been irresponsible for him to analyze that gun. So there is no DNA result from the gun. It's not that the DNA proves it wasn't Chris that touched it. It's that there is no result. It was not analyzed. It was sent, but it wasn't analyzed because it would have been irresponsible to do it given the possibility of an unfair inclusion or an accidental exclusion. So that protects his rights. So there is no DNA from that. But I brought you all of those swabs, all of that evidence that we collected so that you could see we tried. Because if I didn't, then they would be up here saying, where's all the evidence? What's the state hiding? We had to bring it to you. And Lord knows I wish that there was some more evidence on there, but they destroyed it. That car was out there for 5 days. It had been raining. As far as whatever was on their clothes, well, I think we know what they did with them. And we'll see that in a little bit too. But Christina Vachon said, when it comes to GSR in a person's hands, it's ridiculous to think that it'll be on there longer than 4 or 5 hours. When it comes to their clothing, sure, it could remain on there if it's undisturbed. But you saw the condition of the house. Do you think anything in that house was undisturbed? And who knows if they did laundry? Not to mention the sweater that we see Christopher wearing when he goes out and gets in the car with our victims. That sweater wasn't found in the house. They found a bunch of, Detective Goodwin told you, they found a bunch of big emblems on his hoodies, big writing. Not one little emblem like you see on the video. So wherever that one was, we couldn't test it because it's gone. Back to the rings. So Anthony comes over. We have it on the surveillance video. He comes over. Chris texts him. He needs to tell his parents that he's dipping at 2:49 p.m. Anthony shows up and picks him up like 10 minutes later, brings him home around 3:30, and then Chris tells him around 7 almost, I definitely overpaid, but it was well worth it. And then where do we see Anthony's car? After that meeting. 3:47 p.m. Pawning these rings with those very distinctive markings that he very distinctly described in his Instagram messages. That is not a coincidence. That hoodie I was just talking about, couldn't find it. He said he didn't get any blood on himself. Look at his leg. Then we see them put a trash bag in the back of the car, and Chris is wearing a glove on his hand. What in the world? Who does that? Unless you're doing it for a reason. And then his parents leave and somehow wind up stopping their vehicle right next to a dumpster. And then when they come back, they do not remove that bag from their car. That bag is gone. But by the time we realize that they have done this, it's too late for us to do anything about it. That trash is at the dump. The video's gone. They succeeded in destroying evidence and in inhibiting our ability to give you every single unquestionable everything about that night. But that's not on us. That's on them. And that is consciousness of guilt. That is proof of intent. Some other lies that I came across, he said that in his interview, he said, he had to say this because he had to give his story some credibility. He said that when he pulled out his phone to shine the flashlight in the bottom of the car because it was dark, Matthew must have thought he was reaching for something, so that's why he pulled the gun on him. But then he later said that the dome light was on. So why would he need to shine the flashlight in his car? It just doesn't make sense. He said that Matthew was agitated because Chris made him wait. We know that didn't happen. We watched that a little earlier. We know that it was Ramon's gun, not Matthew's. And if Matthew didn't bring the gun, that means Chris did. And if Chris did, that means we know he knew what he was going to do. He knew what he was going to do, and he knew why he was doing it. And now we know why he was doing it. So Savanah and Matthew's injuries. I want to talk about that. The blue are meant to be Savanah, the red are meant to be Matthew's areas. We know the bullet landed in the headliner, right over Matthew's seat. And Dr. Molina told you that if he's in the driver's seat, for that to happen, his head would have to be turned for the bullet to go from here to here and into the headliner. His head would have to be down. And she said that you can't change the relationship between the gun and the firearm. You can change the body, you can change positioning, but that part you can't change. And she also said, to get that contact wound, there has to be force. And Ms. Guerrero pointed out with Detective Goodwin how he was demonstrating the trajectories. He said it's hard to get it this way. He had to force his own arm around to make it work. That's not the story that Christopher tells. Christopher tells a very different story, and because it's very different and very impossible, you know it's crap. And you know he lied, and you know he killed them intentionally. Who are you going to shoot first if you're trying to take out the biggest threat? You want to take out the biggest threat first. So for this trajectory to happen in his story, it just can't. It won't. What happened is he got in the back seat. Matthew thought that he was about to greet a customer or maybe even a friend. He leaned on the center console and started to lean over to talk to him, and he got a bullet in the head.
Her misstating the facts and assuming facts not in evidence.
Ladies and gentlemen, you recall the evidence from the witness stand, what the attorneys say is not evidence.
So with regard to Savanah, he claimed that Matthew had the gun kind of pointed back at him, and he pushed it. But he also said that the gun was so close to his face, he could see the bullet in the barrel, which means that gun needed to be really, really close to his face, if that's even possible. But if he pushed it like he said, given the amount of space between the seats, according to both Dr. Molina and Detective Goodwin, his arm would have hit the back of that chair. It would not have cleared. It certainly wouldn't have come around in a way that he could get Savanah on the back of the head. There is no damage to her car seat. There is no space between the headrest and the back for a bullet to get through. And if Matthew were sitting upright when a struggle happened, like he claimed, there would be blood on the top of that seat, not in the middle, dripping down on the side of the seat. That's consistent with him being leaned over, like I said. If he were sitting up like the defendant said and struggling with him, there wouldn't have even been a contact wound. Because if you're struggling, you're not going to lean into the barrel of the gun unless he grabs the back of your head and forces it down. But that's one thing that Dr. Molina said that cannot be changed. It cannot be controverted. There had to have been force for that wound to occur on Matthew's head. And he said all he did was hit the gun. So you know he's lying. Now, they have brought up regularly, we don't have any witnesses. We talked about that. We didn't pick where this crime occurred. He did. He chose where this happened. So that is why we have the evidence that we have, and we don't have the evidence that we don't. But now I want to talk to you about this. Premeditation and motive are not on our list of elements. We also talked about that in jury selection. We don't have to prove those things, but we did. We absolutely did. And here's why. This Instagram post where he says, "Feed me and I'll bless you. Always good business. Got no reason when I'm already making money off of you. We both eat. These rap people teach you to run off on the plug," drug dealer, "but I'll never switch up on someone feeding my plate." He posted that 2.5 days before the murder. He wants his followers to know he's safe. I'm good business. You have nothing to fear from me. I'm not going to rob you. I'm safe. And then he talks to Anthony. He honestly wants the parts before Christmas. He's trying to get all his bread. That's on the 18th. That is not that far in advance of the murder. And then he says, on December 20th, the day before, "Give me a little time and I will get them." Yeah, Friday or even Thursday actually. And then he says on the 20th again, "Give me till Friday at the latest, but I got your money." He is trying to figure out how to stall and to get that money together right before he kills them. That is not a coincidence. Right before he asks Matthew for a much larger purchase than he ever does. Right before we see him pacing around in his driveway like he is waiting for something to happen. And right before he grabs this gun from his parents' room and walks outside and uses it. That is premeditation. That is planning. Whether he was planning it for days or weeks in advance, or whether he was planning it for hours in advance, it's still planning. He knew what he was going to do. And when his parents went to meet him, the bed of the truck was down when they left to go meet him at Danny K. When they get to Danny K, the bed of the truck is up. When they leave Danny K, after they have spent 5 or so minutes behind that other building where there are no cameras doing God knows what, they come out and the bed is closed again. That means something. And then when they get home, go back and watch this video. Please, go watch it. In the reflection of the other car, you can see them digging around in the bed of the truck when they get back. Christopher hops out of the truck with that blood on his legs, goes straight to the bed of the truck, doesn't go inside. You can see him moving around back there in the reflection. And you know, because of the 2 different camera angles, that Christopher got out of the car before Ramon, based on the timestamps. Christopher is back there first. Ramon goes to meet him, and they're messing around in the bed of the truck after they have just left Danny K. That is evidence. That is a piece of the puzzle that you can add to the ever-growing list of pieces, or pile of pieces, to build the puzzle. And then after the murders, this is where you really know what he wanted all along. He tells his buddy, fuck, I was hoping it was going to be longer because I wanted to go to the Valencia lofts and get the rest of the shit I had there. The Valencia lofts where the victims live. And I'll remind you, we didn't get Matthew's house keys. We didn't get his wallet or ID. So the access and the information that he would have needed to get in and get there and get in, it's missing now. After he murdered them and was in that car. After we know he stole Matthew's rings. That's evidence. And then he's up here telling his friend, I want to go to the Valencia lofts. We're going to make some real money, trust. The gate code, after he asked another friend, which that message is in evidence too. The gate code for Valencia lofts. We're just going to go to pick up some shit that's valuable. I'm trying to make real bread. This dude be doing pounds. Trust. But we've got to be fast. That is pretty much black and white. What else do you need to see to know that he had these intentions? These were his plans all along. A person who acts in legitimate self-defense doesn't rob the dead person of their rings and then go to their apartment and add insult to injury and rob them some more. That is not what an innocent person who acts in legitimate self-defense does.
I'm going to object to assuming facts not in evidence, Your Honor. There's no evidence of robbery after the fact.
Ladies and gentlemen, you recall the evidence from the witness stand, what the attorneys say is not evidence.
We have him on video leaving his house around 7-something, and that's Chris, going to the Valencia lofts thanks to the burla, and he was off camera for 45 minutes. 45 minutes he's unaccounted for. Again, this is common sense. I'm not trying to assume any facts. I'm inferring based on the evidence that is in front of you. 45 minutes. And I want you to look at this. And when you go back and watch these videos, and I hope you do, watch them with VLC player because you can go frame by frame and you can zoom in. When he goes back to his car and he lifts his arm, it looks like there's you can kind of see some writing or some imprint on the left side of his arm. When he comes home, you can see it again. Watch that video, please. And when you see the body cam from the victim's apartment, the one on the left is the 23rd, when Leon Valley does the welfare check. That plant is upright, the vent is on the wall. On the 28th, that plant has been knocked over and that vent has been ripped off the wall. And those are just a couple of examples of the differences between between the condition of that apartment in that time. Ross talked about that a little bit. This is not self-defense, ladies and gentlemen. A legitimate self-defense case does not involve destroying or hiding evidence. I don't know, hid weapon, they hid the weapon. It's not a typo. It doesn't involve wiping down a crime scene. It doesn't involve concealing bodies. It does involve calling for help, but that didn't happen here. It doesn't involve staying at home and hiding out, trying to delete your Instagram conversations, altering the appearance of your truck. It doesn't involve any of that. It certainly doesn't involve reaching out to your friends and fishing for information. Hey, what happened? Home guy died. What do you mean? Did you see the news? That pregnant female passed. I know her. She just died this past week. No one knows what happened. Damn, what the fuck? Or how about this one? Have you seen anybody looking for a car? And this one is great. December 26th, literally right after their bodies. Hey, has that Flacco guy hit you up? All the while knowing Flacco's long dead. Flacco just got found sitting in a car. He knows this, and he's still reaching out to people going, hey, have you heard from him? Do you know what happened to him? Do you have anything you can share with me so I can help prepare myself in case I get caught? That is not what innocent people who act in legitimate self-defense do. And then he has the nerve to ask, do you know how he died? Do you know how he died? He knows how he died. He wants someone else to tell him. A person who acts in self-defense doesn't get on the internet and say, he didn't have a gun. Especially if he's the one who was there and who did it. He admitted he didn't do this in self-defense. He just did it when he didn't think he was going to get caught. That's the difference, and that's why it matters how his personality and his appearance changes in those interviews. Because now all of a sudden, once the police show up, he's a timid, scared young man. And he is trying real hard not to leave behind any DNA. Watch his interview off of his arm, and instead of just letting them fall to the floor, he rolls them up in little balls and sticks them in his pocket. And he does it 8 times. Like Detective Goodwin said, that's weird. He's never seen that before. An innocent person doesn't give away a dead person's rings to pawn and try to stall the person he wants to give them to for those car parts because he's got to fully wash away the dirt and grime. I think he meant blood. A person who acts in legitimate self-defense does not post a tribute to the person that he claims was gonna kill him over $60. You don't post a tribute to the person that you're afraid of, that you blame for nearly killing you. The defense's case is that we don't have any DNA, we don't have any GSR, we don't have any prints, we don't have any blood, we don't have any trace, we don't have any eyewitnesses. I have addressed every single one of these. There's no eyewitnesses because he picked where the crime happened. There's no evidence because they got rid of it. Forensic evidence because he got rid of it. Now, I will say with regard to the DNA results, yes, he was excluded from the majority of what we found, but there was one specimen in the back seat that he was not excluded from. So go back and look at that report because it's in evidence. He was not excluded. The report said that it was limited support that he is not present. I know that's a double negative, but it wasn't moderate support that he's not present. It wasn't high support that he's not present. It was limited. And what that means is we don't have enough DNA to tell. So half of those samples, they don't say he wasn't there. They just weren't able to be tested because there wasn't enough DNA because they wiped everything down. It's that simple.
About 5 minutes, Dave.
I'm wrapping it up now. We have proven every single element beyond a reasonable doubt, and we have disproven self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt in so many different ways, with so many different pieces of evidence. when the defendant was giving his fairy tale story about how he got arrested by Leon Valley, Anthony responded with, "It wasn't violent or extreme at all." I think the irony of that is that Anthony didn't know that those two words were about as appropriate as you could get in describing what Christopher Preciado actually did on December 21st of 2023. Violence, extreme. Dr. Molina testified Savanah's wound wasn't necessarily fatal. If somebody would have done something about it, that baby might have been able to be saved. This was extreme. This was violence. This was senseless. It was unnecessary, and it was unjustified. It was selfish. It was monetarily based. There was no good reason for it. This was all over some maybe street cred and a few $100s worth of car parts and whatever $620 gets you that Matthew was going to bring him that night. And the only reason that he was able to pull it off is because Matthew didn't see him as a threat. To Matthew, Christopher was just the sheep that he looks like. He didn't know that he was a wolf in sheep's clothing because he had Matthew fooled. But he didn't have Detective Goodwin fooled. He didn't have us fooled, and I don't think he's got you fooled either. So tell him that. Tell him, we see through this facade, we see through your games, we see through your act. We know what you did and we know why you did it. Tell him that. Send him that message, as well as the community, that every life matters. Every person deserves justice, no matter who they are, no matter what they do in this world. When they are ruthlessly and unjustifiably taken from it. Especially when it's a life that didn't even have the chance to live. He deserves to be held accountable for every single one of those deaths. So we're asking that you find him guilty of capital murder on all 3 counts.
All rise for the jury.